Jai Guru, everyone.
Jai Guru.
Jai Guru,
guys. Welcome to this minute 78 of Awake, Minute by Minute podcast. I'm your host today, Chris, and we are blessed today with a guest, Erin. Erin, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.
Nice, thanks for being here. So, Erin, you're a devotee in the London Centre. Do you want to shortly introduce yourself, who you are, where in the world you live?
For podcast listeners, Erin looks quite majestic right now. He's got his beard looks like he could be as old as Lady Mahashai, but his eyes and hair look like he's as youthful as Mahavtar Babaji. So he's got a good combo going.
Yeah, so I'm new on the path this year. I read Autobiography of a Yogi last year, and then I didn't really follow up with it until I heard that some monks were coming to SRF in June of this year, Brother Padmananda and Brahmacharya Berto. And from there, that was when I found out about the lessons and signed up. So still working my way through the basic series and trying my best weekly to attend the Sunday services. So yeah, I'm located in London.
Nice. And you had the Autobiography of Yogi last year, but then you got back onto it. How did you first come across it?
So I heard about it. Yeah. Well, it's nothing too big. I heard about it through a friend who I think he's actually following another guru, but he recommended the book to me. And obviously, you know, when you see that front cover for the first time, it always, you know, works some magic on you. And I think I read about half of it and then sort of put it aside for a while. And I guess those ideas and stuff were subconsciously manifesting. And, you know, in the future, like a few months later, I just felt a tugging to go back to reading it. And I think I'd stopped just before the resurrection of Sri Yukteswar. And so like coming back and reading that chapter, that was super, super powerful. Definitely one of my favorite chapters. And yeah, from there, as I said, then it was interesting. I was just on my phone. I don't think I quite picked up like how big SRF was from the book, and I hadn't heard about the lessons. I was just, you know, so focused on like, how do I get Kriya? Do I need to go to India and stuff like that? And then, yeah, just one day I was on my phone and Self-Realization Fellowship popped up as like the first story on Instagram. And then it came up with this notification that the monks were coming. So Priyank was joking that, you know, Guruji played with the algorithm, so I would see that. So yeah,
who knows? And it is actually on topic because we're talking about Guruji's Mahasamadhi today, and you know, he's leaving his physical form, but he of course left many messages to say that he could be of more assistance to us thereafter. So yeah, quite on topic. And the Awake documentary, have you watched it fully end to end? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I have watched it. I watched it, I think back in August when convocation was happening, because obviously on the app they have it on there on Vimeo. So yeah, that was the first time I watched it, and it was super powerful. Yeah, very inspiring.
Yeah, it's nice. There's so much good content on the app, isn't there, for convocation?
Yeah, there really is.
They've done a good job getting up to speed.
I've been amazingly impressed with all of the online resources, like the Lessons app and stuff like that.
Yeah, you're fortunate. Nice. When Chris, Mike, and I joined, there was nothing of this ilk. Not even on YouTube. SRF didn't even have a YouTube channel, and now it's like blooming.
Yeah, I love listening. Like I try to listen to because I do like delivery driving as a job, so I try and listen to one of like the monks' talks every day from SRF, and they're so helpful with staying motivated for the path.
Nice. Well, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
We are on minute 78, so that means previous minute 77. What happened? There's a short recap. Brother Chidananda and Sri Dayamata made an appearance, and we were delving into the moment of Paramahansaji's Mahasamadhi. And now in minute 78, we do continue the next scenes of Paramahansaji's Mahasamadhi. And in it, we see Guruji's body being carried away or carried into a room with devotees, laying flowers on top. And I believe this is 3 days post death, I believe, this scene. So his body is looking pretty radiant, and we're going to get into that subject in a little bit more detail on this minute. And we see scenes where Rajasri Janakananda was kneeling beside Paramahansaji's body, hands together in prayer. And then another scene where there's many devotees standing over Paramahansaji's body, hands together in prayer, praying, giving their gratitude and love to Yogananda. And we see a young Kriyananda, as we've talked about in recent minutes. He's standing towards the back there in some of the pictures. There's some very moving pictures and scenes in this minute. And we have another appearance, really, by Mahasamadhi. So Mahasamadhi is there saying about the yogic tradition, saying that there's the sacred practice of knowing when you're going to leave your body. And that's a whole other subject for discussion as well. So we'll touch on that and talking about moving to a grander space out of the physical form. And of course, the doctor, as he says, had claimed Yogananda died of a heart attack. So we'll touch on that as well. So this is the minute. This is what we're dealing with. There is a lot in this minute that we have talked about in previous minutes. So in minute 21, we did discuss death, cremations versus burials, the resurrection of Sri Yukteswar. And again, in minute 63, we talked about death, Mahasamadhi, and traditions of funerals of masters versus others, like everybody else.
And in the last episode, minute 77, we for some reason covered it because there's one random image of a cremation. So we must be really into this subject. Morbid.
And it's funny because I'm not all that, as much as I'm interested in it, my heart isn't necessarily in it. So we have covered it. So we'll not go into it in any more detail.
Mike, what did you say? I didn't hear you. Just that.
Morbid, said.
We
are into it.
Okay.
Oh, we are into it. Is that you? Okay.
I said morbid, yeah.
You said, yeah. So we shan't be too morbid, but it is, there are topics here that are super interesting. So we will touch on them. So we'll touch more about, the leaving the body, incorruptibility, that of course we are aware that Yogananda had, and more. So we'll jump into it. So the scenes, guys, we do see people leaving flowers over the body, and then many people giving prayer. We've talked about this in previous minutes, but it must have been such a blessing, but also so moving and challenging to be there in those moments, and scary, I think, for a lot of devotees, because how many people, whenever there's a great master around, look away and don't pay heed to the lessons and everything, that's all the wisdom and truth, knowledge coming out of them. But then the ones that actually do, the true devotees, that many of them that are standing over his bedside, they must have been quite concerned, in these moments. I know I probably would be. You would be wanting more time with your Guruji, with your Guru. So it must have been really moving. Mike, what's your take on these scenes?
So where I grew up in Austria, when you have a funeral, you don't, like, I know in America you often see those pictures, open casket, where they prepare the dead body and then you walk past it. But where I grew up, that's not a thing at all. you go to a funeral and all you see is a casket, and then people hand out a flyer with like a picture of them and some stories. And the whole thing that he lies there like that on the bed is just yeah, it's different. But it's also great, and they did a really good job colorizing those images, because it must have been black and white, and it looks like he looks like more like he's sleeping than anything else.
Yeah, he's almost smiling, isn't he? One of the close-ups. And we'll talk about that, because the mortuary made a comment on his facial expressions, even whenever a few days after he passed. Priyank, what's your take?
Yeah, a couple of things. Firstly, the monks that are surrounding him, or I don't know if they're monks, but devotees surrounding him are in yellow, bright yellow. I don't know what color that signifies, if they're brahmacharis before monks, or I don't know. But if someone knows, let me know. That would be interesting. But the other thing was, as in contrast to what Mike said about the culture of how they pay their respects to a vacated body, and enclosed casket form, etc. It's very much open caskets in Indian traditions, and there's a concept called taking the darshan, taking one last darshan of that soul that has departed. So, for example, if your parent passed away, then you would seek to take one last blessing from them by approaching their physical form. So then that is something that that they do. It's quite moving. So yeah, that's in contradiction slightly to how our Westerners would slightly do it, probably. But I was thinking, when these devotees that are around, some of them are obviously quite young, some of them perhaps like Donald Walters, Kriyananda, who's in that image, as you said, he would have just probably known him for a couple of years. And there'll be many devotees that haven't known him for that long, and they've just come in, so they may regret not coming into the path sooner, especially having the glorious confirmation of his divinity through Mahasamadhi. Like the regret of I missed out on what could have been, so much more of a life-changing experience with my guru. So there's that regret, and also the regret of I could be doing so much more. So it should hopefully inspire some people as well to, especially if I was there, I'd certainly be inspired after taking darshan. Erin?
Yeah, I think that final point you made was interesting, because I think there definitely would have been a split there, right? That for some people it definitely would have been super motivating to do more. But then I think, as you said earlier, Chris, and I think they mentioned this in a wake somewhere, is obviously Guruji was, very exotic and a great speaker and attracted, huge crowds and stuff. But obviously, when he passed, I'm sure that there were a lot of people that, weren't motivated to do more and kind of went the opposite direction and maybe, wandered away from the path and stuff, because they were there for him and not necessarily for the teachings and the lessons and stuff.
Yeah, it is likely to be the case. But Yogananda did make it clear that he was able to be more effective without that physical form. So I'm sure many who may have strayed may have been encouraged to come back in this life or the next, or in that life or the next, possibly. So whilst I think there was a comment made a couple of times that if you were linked karmically to Yogananda, you would find your way to this path. So karmically may simply be that you've come across Yogananda, you've had interactions with him, there's been something there. So I think anybody that's been blessed to have shared any kind of moment with him, I find it, to my mind, inevitably might be drawn back to this path, to their sort of path. So we talked about this before. Do you think you've shared a life with Yogananda in some form in the past incarnations? Yeah, mixed responses. Yes is usually the kind of prepared response. So Masvidal, as I mentioned, said, sorry, Mike, do you want to jump in the comment?
Yeah, there was a talk by Sister Draupadi at Convocation where she said you probably didn't just have one life with the guru, but you probably had a life with each of the gurus that are on the altar. So I just wanted to add that.
It's just showing off. Yeah. That would be a nice reality.
It's a nice thought, isn't it? Yeah.
Nice thought. Yeah. Well, sharing that. So Masvidal, as I mentioned, he said in the yoga tradition, there is a sacred practice of knowing when you will leave your body. And we know that Yogananda, in his last few days, but in the build up to his Mahasamadhi, have been sharing with people close to him to say that he was being called inwardly, and he didn't know how long he would have. And there's a great story that was linked to the vision of visions with the Bhagavad Gita, where Yogananda went into deep samadhi, and then the Divine Mother spoke through him to a group of devotees, to the monks, and Sri Dayamata was there, I believe, and others. And he was going on for hours. So this went on all night. In this conversation, he was talking to Divine Mother. And the response was coming through his own voice from Divine Mother. So it was really, really moving for a lot of people there. But apparently when he came out of it, he was saying, oh, well, no, I really need to focus on my work now, because he was actually given more time. So he wasn't even sure. At times, was he really going to be taken away? Because he was being constantly drawn within. He was constantly being taken into deeper and deeper states of unity, consciousness with God. So he did mention that he may have days or hours left. But it did make me think, like, this whole knowing when your time's up. Would you want that yourselves? Like, is that something? Imagine if everybody had. There is a funny movie. I think it's kind of satire, but it's the Brand New Testament. I think it's a French movie, and it's the storyline goes that God accidentally slips to the planet, to everybody on the planet, like when they're going to die, and the planet actually turns into chaotic place, even more chaotic than what it is already. But ultimately, people find their peace in knowing when they're going to die. And they turn many things around. They apologize for things they've done to people, and they try to live their best lives. Do you guys think that would be the case in reality, or what's your take, Mike?
Well, the thing is, if you don't have any spiritual education or knowledge, then all it would do for you is you would die, so you would try to prevent it, right? Because you're clinging onto your life like as much as you can. But I feel like Yogananda, we mentioned that before, right? That he lived his life as long as he had to, not as long as he wanted to, right? Once he felt like his job was done, he's like, I'm out of here. I'm done with it. And
he was happy to go. Yeah.
Some people are probably on the fence. Like, I think Brother Ritananda told the story once. There was this devotee who he was a long-term devotee from, I think he said Costa Rica, or Puerto Rico, and he said in his meditations he saw the spiritual eye very brightly, and at some point the spiritual eye talked to him and said, your time on earth is coming to an end. And he found the shocking news, right? But then he had the idea, like he comprehended it, and he felt like after this life, this is gonna be great, actually. So, and then he had this task to tell his wife about it, that his life is coming to an end. And yeah, it's never easy, I guess. But I guess if you have the spiritual kind of background, then it's great. But if, yeah, like you said, it will probably be like in this movie. It will probably be chaos in everybody do. Erin?
Yeah, I agree, but I also think even if you did have like a kind of spiritual background, I think it could be that kind of information would be like a double-edged sword. Could be potentially like harmful to your growth, depending on at like what period in your life you received that information. Possibly like if you were, you know, young like us on the path and you got told, well, you're not going to leave your body till you're 90, then, you know, maybe you might not take it as seriously. But if you're told that in a few years, you know, you're going to move on, then maybe you would. But I think overall it would probably just enhance like your current mindset. It's like they say, like where you go after death is your mindset at the time of death, right? So that's why we train ourselves to seek God habitually through meditation. So we go there. So I feel like wherever your like mindset is now, like it would probably have a similar effect.
It's funny you mentioned that. I think there's some kind of superhero movie where the person realizes that they're going to die many, many years ahead in advance. So they're just fearless in battle. They just walk around as if, you know, they're obviously not, they're not going to die. They know when they're going to die. So they just walk around with this fearless attitude.
Interesting you should mention that, because in Bhishma, who you'll know is the grandfather or the uncle of the Pandavas, and he so the grandfather or the uncle of I think grandfather of Arjuna, he had this boon where he could choose when he would die. So like you know when you just said that these soldiers like valiantly went around because they knew that they were invincible. Effectively Bhishma was invincible. So like him being on that side was like quite worrying for the Pandavas, because you got essentially an invincible man on the other side and someone who you actually don't want to kill because he's like really respected. So they didn't. So that was quite a good angle. But then on the other side there was Krishna. So Krishna, obviously whatever happens, Krishna was considered as God. So he would determine what fate would come to pass. But Bhishma, what happened was that it said that he got impaled with so many arrows that his like loads of arrows, but he was still didn't want to leave his physical form, because I can't remember why, if it's to do with something that he still wanted to stay for whatever reason. I can't remember if it was for like he wanted to burn some more karma or something, but he wanted to continue in that suffering state. So he was literally impaled with a barrage of arrows. And in Indian like cinema and like serials that depict this scene, there's literally like you'll have like arrows in the ground and Bhishma's body suspended in the arrows, like suspended by impaled arrows. It's quite it's quite a sight.
Yeah, there were some monks that or a monk that said, I read it somewhere, I can't remember exactly who it was, but that the exact timing wasn't known, and that was really a blessing because it relieves you from the shock of the moment. And that was said in relation to Guruji. So that's also something to take note of, that yes, your time is near, very near maybe, but your exact moment and how and things like this, it's probably not great to have those details, no matter who you are maybe. Well,
I'd love to have the details.
Would you?
I would.
I think Diamond knew, right? Because like she knew he was gonna leave the body, but not how. But then she said, once he got up to give his speech, she kind of knew this is the moment. Right?
Yeah.
So
intuitively. But yeah, I'd like to know, because then at least like say you knew at this hour, this minute, at least then you can like put your gaze at the Kutosh, the correct center, and then hopefully it makes some sort of difference.
Yeah. Well, that's what they said. Guruji Guruji did that wasn't actually in the minute. We talked about that last minute, didn't we? Mike, do you have another comment?
Yeah, it's a bit dark, but I was in Switzerland a few years back, and there was this guy, I forgot his name now, but his job was basically going to sites and removing the astral souls from there and telling them to go home. And he said a lot of times, like when you die, you know that you're dying, and you kind of have this whole process going on. And he says those astral souls that got lost, they often died so abruptly that they don't even know they died, and they keep on living their lives here, even though it's already over, which I found interesting. I'm not sure if that's how it works, but that's what he told us.
To the man that shall remain nameless, who has a book on this, on death. It's
he who shall not be named
shall remain nameless. It's a very good book on this, and says that effectively people can be frozen still in time for hundreds of years, maybe thousands of years, if something happens to them that they simply don't accept that they are dead, which is shocking, really. That's something that I did not know about before coming on the spiritual path, and is very useful to know in some way, I think. And really talking about the nature of Yogananda's death, obviously he collapsed very publicly, and to many that were there still maybe wouldn't want to have accepted at the time that he was going into Mahasamadhi. It was a very, very public affair, drew lots of attention around the world. So this was somebody who really made quite a big splash in the Western world, brought yoga to the West in many ways. And he had a Mahasamadhi very publicly. So that's something we can maybe think about, like, why did it happen that way, and so on and so forth. But it was quite forceful message. And of course, he was bringing the message of science, the science of yoga. And if this isn't too crude, but no news is no bad news is not all news is bad news. And this was news that was able to be spread around the world. And I just messed up that analogy, but the point is that he was able to get that message, far and wide because of what happened after that point as well, which we'll touch on in a minute. But Priyank,
yeah, I just wanted to talk about the heart attack thing. Is now a good time?
Yeah.
So Masvidal said that, and it was quite nice because there was quite a nice little poignant pause after Masvidal said his consciousness moves to a grander space, and from that we can infer from Sri Yukteswar's the resurrection of Sri Yukteswar chapter, we can infer that Masvidal is talking about the soul leaving the physical and for a brief sojourn going to the astral. But whether or not that applies to an avatar, we can conjecture. But the next bit was interesting, which is then he paused and he said, kind of whimsically and kind of a little bit of taking it very as if he's trying to refute that point. He says, the doctor said it was a heart attack. And then there's this long pause. So that's interesting that a doctor would call a Mahasamadhi a heart attack. And because, for example, when Swami Vivekananda passed, so what happened, he was suffering from loads of ailments. And, devotees say that he was taking on the karma of various of his disciples. So he had lots of physical ailments. So his last days there was a lot of suffering, and he was perspiring, and there was apparently his head shook and fell off the pillow, and his eyes became still. But after all this, there was a smile on his lips, as described by the disciples, and an unearthly glow was emitting from his smiling face. And then he left. But doctors examined him, and two schools of thought came about from that. So one was that he had a heart attack, but there was another doctor who said that he had a brain, a blood vessel in his brain had ruptured. And both doctors violently disagreed with each other's hypothesis as to the cause of the death. But the brain, the blood vessel in the brain is interesting, because that's where the the Brahmanadi, the one of the chakras, like is. So like the crown, the opening at the crown of the head, if he left his body from that chakra, that's like the ultimate way of the ultimate Mahasamadhi, basically. And so if something crazy was to happen in your brain, that would indicate in Indian sciences that's where you left your body. But yeah, I find it so funny that, and that's another example of like how little doctors know about the causes of death. Obviously, when it's this is when it's subtle. I'm talking about in cases such as Yogananda's, where you're literally standing and collapsing. So doctors, I feel they just attribute heart attack to, because what does heart attack mean? It means that your heart stopped beating. Why did it stop beating? Heaven only knows. Doctors can't really probe that. They can, look into the medical background, like as in Swami Vivekananda's case, all these issues that he had. But in Guruji's case, he was relatively, he had a few ailments and he was dealing with the karma of his devotees as well, but he had no medical grounds for a sudden passing such as that. But I feel that doctors don't really like to enter this realm of space, because it kind of like, you have to throw your textbooks out the window at that stage.
Yeah, well, for them, they would call it pseudoscience, right? Because it doesn't exist within the Western field of science yet. But then that's something that might well come full circle in time. And I think, not being an expert on this subject at all, I've heard things like, where the heat is felt in the chakras system post death, you can tell maybe where the chakras were active at the time of death, and that might be an indicator as well. And there's something about an indentation on the head. If you do go out your top crown chakra, there might be like an indentation on the head. I've heard that somewhere as well, which is quite interesting. If anybody has any information on that's listening and cares to share it, please do, because it is a very interesting topic.
I was telling my colleague about Guruji for some reason. I regret it now. I was saying about and then for some reason his Mahasamadhi came up, and I said, he recited this poem in India, and then he left his body just at the right, the perfect moment. So he kind of chose when to leave his body, and that's an ancient, rite of a realized master. And she said, "Oh, so he committed suicide." I was like, "What a crude interpretation."
Yeah, I think that's been said about Sadhguru and his wife. I think there's whole conspiracies with that as well. Lack of understanding of what maybe she was able to do spurs a lot of distrust in him as well at times, from what I know. Erin,
yeah, thanks. I think, as you said, like it's a difficult field for any of the doctors and stuff to try and say what happened, but I guess there's always going to be like some physical trace of like, why the death occurred. But it kind of, the whole heart attack thing reminds me of the story of when he first came to the West, and I think he was in one of those big lecture halls, and he then invited a doctor up on stage to ask them to feel his pulse, and the doctor couldn't feel anything. And then, he said, feel my pulse on the other wrist. And then it was beating at, an impossibly fast rate and stuff. So I guess I always felt that at the time of death, that's how Yogananda just allowed his soul to like leave the body, is, he just like caused that to happen with his heart.
Possibly, yeah. He did talk about his legs and heart being affected by the amount of karma that he took on toward the latter days. So I think he was probably quite aware that there's a toll on the body, the physical form, when you begin to take that much karma from your devotees and others. So yeah, there has to be some physical trace. Absolutely, we are entwined into this physical form. Shall we jump into the next topic then, incorruptibility? and it's on the cards. There's tons of information on this. We could easily talk about this for at least a whole hour on a podcast in and of itself. But one thing that I did find that was of interest was the mortuary report. And for anybody that's interested in this, we can link the full document, the PDF, on the podcast in the description below. And this is the mortuary responsible for, Yogananda's body, taking care of his body. So they would have picked it up because the desire at the time was to have Yogananda's body on display, and for the rituals and everything that were going on there. They embalmed his body and then kept watch over the body for the period before it was finally put to rest. And they left many notes. So it's a 4-page report. So we don't need to go into all of it, but we will try to pull out some bits that are pretty interesting to read. Priyank, do you want to start us off on this subject?
Yes. The absence of any visual signs of decay in the dead body of Paramahansa Yogananda offers the most extraordinary case in our experience. No physical disintegration was visible in Yogananda's body, even 20 days after death. The body was under daily observation at the mortuary. From March 11th, 1952, the last day of the public rites, until March 27th, 1952, when the bronze casket was sealed by fire. During this period, no indication of mold was visible on Yogananda's skin, and no visible desiccation, drying up, took place in the bodily tissues. This state of perfect preservation of the body is, so far as we know from mortuary annals, an unparalleled one.
So that's a pretty big statement from people who would have dealt with the decaying nature of physical form on a daily basis. Mike, do you want to continue reading?
Yeah, I actually want to say, I mean, we talked about this in earlier minutes, that there is in the Catholic tradition, there's a few saints that had a body that did not decay. And I'm not sure if that's also in the Hindu tradition, that there is cases of bodies that did not decay. Maybe there is, but it seems to be like a universal sign of a great master, right? When his body does not decay. Yeah, let me continue on reading. Yeah.
The Christian saints that manifested this bodily immutability, not through yoga, but through the powers of their like single-hearted aspiration toward God, were St. John of the Cross and St. Teresa of Avila. I think there are others, but St. John died in 1591 and he was exhumed in 1859. And the reports were that his body was found to be in a state of incorruptibility. Mother Teresa lay in the church at Alba in Spain, and has for 4 centuries remained in a immutable state there as well. So, yeah, Christians do have a few counts on this subject.
Yeah, I was thinking of Saint Bernadette. Like I was in Beziers and saw her. Like it's an open casket, but they do put clothes on her and everything, so you don't see much exposed skin, but you can see her there. Yeah.
I'm in Rome at the minute and been traveling around Italy for the past couple of months, and I go into churches and you just turn a corner and there's a body right, like on display. And for me, it's quite unusual. You don't get that, certainly not in Northern Ireland or the UK.
Yeah.
From what I know. But they really are big on it here. There's lots of body parts and things like that from saints that they really display. That are in really, really, really great conditions. So it seems to be quite a thing in Italy, at the very least. I don't know about the rest of the world. Priyank?
In the autobiography of a yogi, Yogananda talks about Kabir, the great Sufi mystic in India. And ancient times. And so when he's got some absolutely beautiful poems, by the way, I'd highly recommend them. So he when he passed, Muslims wanted to claim him as theirs, and Hindus wanted to claim him as theirs. Like, for example, he talked about Kriya very obviously. He said, like, one of the words in his poem is Ulti Pavan Chadaunga Gaunga. So that means Ulti Pavan means the reverse current. I'll rise up, and I'll sing the glory of God. So that, you know, for Hindus, that's just like, you know, so obviously related to the rising up of the Kundalini and the energy coming up the spine. So anyway, Hindus and Muslims were battling after he passed. Were battling over who. Hindus wanted to cremate him, and Muslims wanted to bury him. So so when they finally did open his casket, they just found like a group of roses, and so the Muslims, half of them the Muslims took and buried, and the other half the Hindus took to cremate. It's quite a nice story in the autobiography, if you remember that one.
Oh, I don't remember that one actually. It's a great story. Nice one. Good addition there. Great memory. Sorry, Mike, do you want to continue reading from this mortuary report?
Yeah. The hands at all times remained normal in size, revealing no signs of shriveling or pinching at the fingertips. The place where desiccation is ordinarily seen very early. The lips, which wore a slight smile, continuously retained their firmness. The physical appearance of Yogananda on March 27th, just before the bronze cover of the casket was put into position, was the same as it had been on March 7th. He looked on March 27th as fresh and as unravaged by decay as he had looked on the night of his death.
Erin.
On March 27th, on March 27th, there was no reason to say that his body had suffered any visible physical disintegration at all. For these reasons, we state again that the case of Paramahansa Yogananda is unique in our experience. In the interest of truth, we are glad to present this written account for publication in Self-Realization Fellowship magazine.
That's it. Yeah, I thought that last part was so touching, actually. I don't know what you guys make of this, but they're clearly in a position where they haven't had this before. This is clearly new to them. And probably the people involved, they'll remember that for the rest of their lives, because it would be so unusual and unique for them. But they were in the interest of truth. It's such a nice statement that they were glad to present the written account, and it's stating facts. You know, they're not stating any interpretations of what's going on, but they're stating facts. I was reading online that, of course, inevitably online you'll find some conspiracy theorists out there. Not knocking conspiracy theorists, but you will find some conspiracies about anything out there.
You're quite a big fan of conspiracy theories, aren't you, Chris?
The only difference between a conspiracy and reality is about 6 months, they say.
Yeah, it's not to digress too much, but that's actually sort of, I know we all have our own path of getting here and stuff, and that was sort of my route, was initially going into all kinds of crazy conspiracies and eventually, you know, being saved by Guruji, finding Autobiography of a Yogi. But you know, some of them are interesting for sure.
Which conspiracies are you talking about, if you don't mind me asking?
This is a segue now.
Yeah,
it sounded really interesting.
Maybe we can speak about it
offline
next time I'm in London Centre.
When everyone's left the building, I imagine.
Yeah.
So one of them that I found was simply people trying to debunk this issue. Maybe a debunking is a better word for this. People saying that, you know, he was embalmed, he was preserved artificially. So whenever you embalm the body, it looks more pristine, it glows, and it holds There's no mold, there's nothing really takes effect. But I read, skim read the report, and I did find a note about this, so I thought maybe to read this out as well. So it said, for protection of the public health, embalming is desirable. And so what this, so it says, if a dead body is to be exposed for several days to public view, embalming of the body of Paramahansa Yogananda took place 24 hours after his demise. In normal room temperature, the enzyme action of the intestines of deceased persons causes distension of the tissues in the abdominal region about 6 hours after death. Such distension did not occur at any time in the case of Paramahansa Yogananda. So that was super interesting. And they did go on to say, when the mortuary received the body for embalming, it presented no signs of physical deterioration and no refractive, I'm really struggling with my words today, I'm so sorry, odor. Two very unusual absences when a death has occurred 24 hours earlier. So they did address that themselves to say that even with the embalming, there were still no signs of what they would expect to see. So it was a very unusual case for them, even with that. So hopefully that debunks the debunkers out there to a good extent. And when afterward the body was kept in the crypt of the sanctuary of the Golden Slumber in Holly Terrace of the Great Mausoleum in LA, and then it was kept there for a short time until it reached its permanent enshrinement in Mother Center in LA. So I thought that was certainly worth going into, but for a topic that is maybe a bit more lighthearted. Gone is the physical form of Yogananda, but now it is boundless. It is there for all of us to tap into at any time, readily. Mike, would you be able to read out a little story? I'll just set the context here. There's a story that I found online about Yogananda appearing to heal and bless people in LA, in Encinitas Gardens. So there's a devotee story who was walking with Brother Ramananda. Mike, would you be able to read that out for us today?
So he says, a local SRF member who's known as Dr. K from the US, who is an alternative health doctor, received a new patient who was suffering from aches and pains, and nothing seemed to help her. He did his best to treat her and then mentioned, have you ever been to the SRF meditation gardens? She said no, but she was intrigued. On her next visit to Dr. K, she told him that she had visited the gardens and that something very strange happened. A man was going around touching everyone on the forehead, and the security guard didn't do anything about it. The man came up to her, touched her on the forehead, and her pains were gone. Dr. K found a copy of Autobiography of a Yogi, showed her the cover, and she said, that's him.
Wow.
That's a great story, isn't it?
Yeah, I haven't heard that one before.
Yeah. And so she was essentially witnessing post-death Yogananda Guruji walking around giving blessings to people who were at the gardens, unbeknownst to them. That's if you didn't have any inspiration to go to the gardens, maybe that would lure you in. Yeah, I thought I'd share that.
They are magical. Every time I drive past there, either on the way up or on the way down, it's mandatory. Just quick stop.
Mm-hmm.
Are you talking about Lake Shrine or Mother Center Garden, Mike? Do you think in this?
And I think they meant, somehow I thought they meant Encinitas when I saw this. So
it was Encinitas.
Kind of.
Yeah.
That's why I was.
Okay, fine.
Encinitas. Yeah.
Yeah. So that every time you go down to San Diego or something, gotta stop in Encinitas for a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Oh man, I really want to go there. Vatsal was talking about the beautiful gardens in Hidden Valley as well. That's high on my list of priorities. He said,
Yeah, I hope they will open up again soon.
He said he spent like a few months there and in the garden, and all he did was weeding.
I know that's your dream, Priya.
Has to be done. I was taking care of the London Centre's garden for a while when I was there. It really, they say, you know, the more you give service to, you know, SRF and Guruji, the more spiritual reward you get. And doing the menial tasks, super, you know, clean the toilets, super rewarding.
That's the only reason why we serve, isn't it? Just kidding. No, Erin was.
You have been doing a bit of sweeping of the leaves, haven't
yeah,
I?
he's been properly sweeping.
Nice. Keep it up. You never know. You could be having a hand on your forehead, unbeknownst to you.
Could be.
Could be, absolutely.
Or has.
Or has, yeah. So yeah, we know Christ was he materialized his physical form, convincing the doubting Thomas that he was truly there. And we reading the autobiography of a yogi, page 350, we see that at the morning hour of 10 o'clock on the day after the body of Lahiri Mahasaya had been consigned to the flames, the resurrected master in a real but transfigured body appeared before 3 disciples, one in each different city. And we see in chapter 43, Sri Yukteswarji's body manifested after death to comfort his grieving son Yoganandaji. So we do see
my favorite chapter.
Yeah, we do see moments of this in the autobiography of a yogi. So absolutely, Guruji is blessed and able to do this as well, it seems. So there's a high level point here, you know, why are saints taken from us at all? We did talk about this in a previous minute, but I did just want to bring it up because maybe mankind simply wouldn't be wouldn't take advantage of it after a while. We would get used to having such great saints among us, and even with that, we wouldn't awake from our slumbers, and it takes the loss to really stir some of us from our slumbers, unfortunately. But it is extremely rare for the Hindu scriptures tell us that it is extremely rare, really, for saints to keep their bodies for any period of time. But we do know of the case of Mahavatar Babaji that has kept his body, but that was a command given to him by God, really, in a very rare and special case. And he's not seen too often. He's not walking around, really. He's in the Himalayas somewhere. But Priyank.
Yeah, I think that's the key point. Even though, you know, he's fulfilling his promise of staying in the physical form, so long as you know, people are seeking him, he's not really available physically to most of us, energetically wise and spiritually. That's a different matter, and that's a matter for, you know, that's true for all the gurus. But if it was the alternate, and you know, Yogananda didn't pass, for example, and he stayed in his physical form for 100, 200, 300 years, then he would become the Messiah, right? Because he'd be there'd be no refuting a Messiah if he's going to live for 300, 400, whatever, however many hundreds of years, right? If he's there in flesh and blood, proving to you all his miraculous capabilities, then the free will would end, right? Then there'd just be compulsion to follow, because it would be a Messiah thing. So I think it's just not in keeping with how this whole design is. Like, we have to make that decision ourselves to go towards or seek the divinity within ourselves, as opposed to, you know, God coming and saying, "Look, here I am, follow me. All else is hell."
Yeah. Yeah, it does seem to be the way that once the mold is cast, you know, you got to break it to remold it again with human beings. But Mike, do you have a comment?
Yeah, so Guruji, I think about the way he conducted his Mahasamadhi, I think this was the most public way he could possibly do, right? So he was really trying to send a message, and that's kind of the point that you guys made earlier about doing it for us, right? Getting us out of the slumber. And the story of Swami Pranabananda comes to mind in the autobiography, right? He's like there's like a big feast or something, and they all meditate together. And then while this all happens, he just leaves the body. He even tells one of his disciples, "Yeah, I'm gonna be God soon," and he goes like, "No, don't do it." And with Yogananda, it was similar, and he did it in a public hotel for everyone to see. Just it wasn't on camera. That's the only thing. But I feel like they do this just to show us, right? Some things they're meant to be private, but this one is not meant to be private, right? This is meant to be a fact out for the public, to be analyzed by scientists and everything, just to be a proof of the kind of the reality that he teaches and God.
Erin?
Yeah, just on that point, like, you know, it kind of reminds me of like the Last Supper of Christ. And I think when I was watching Awake for the first time, it kind of I did feel like you could draw a lot of similarities between you know, Christ and Guruji's lives, and you know, the struggles that they went through and stuff. I know you know, some of the points that they covered in Awake were not covered in Autobiography of Yogi, and I definitely got quite emotional the first time watching it, you know, learning about all of the struggles that Guruji had trying to set up SRF, and you know, the people that stuck by him and who didn't. And you know, it kind of reminded me of like the Jesus and the Judas and stuff like that. I imagine, you know, maybe a lot of avatars have that kind of similar story and stuff.
Yeah, we've talked about this somewhat before, that for many people it would have been the first time that they would have heard about the struggles that Yogananda has did go through, and for us, no less. So he certainly didn't need to do it. we talked about that he often voiced that. You know, he often said to please let me go to the Himalayas and you know, go in deep meditation and be in states of bliss and unification with him. So going through what he did go through was really for us. So he did go through these pains for other people. So it is quite moving for sure. There's a sense of gratitude, isn't there, whenever you finish the last few minutes, especially the way they do that, which we'll talk in future minutes, is really well done in this documentary. So it does build up to that very neatly, very nicely. Now, Priyank, you added a card about Mary Magdalene. Do you want to read about that? I think it's coming from the Second Coming of Christ.
Yeah. So, firstly, I think it may be pronounced Magdalene.
Oh yeah.
Don't know. Maybe Mike knows. The reason I say that is because I went to Magdalene College in Oxford or Cambridge once, and they were saying it's Magdalene. So, all right. Anyway,
Interesting.
This I thought was relevant because we were talking about you know, taking darshan of Guruji and of his physical form before you know, it's entombed. And also we talked about incorruptibility and the body and what happens to bodies usually when the soul departs. So I thought this was quite a good explanation of some things in the case of Christ in relevance to what we were talking about. So I'll start, and then perhaps Erin, you can carry on. When Jesus first appeared to Mary Magdalene, he had raised his body from the tomb, yet he said, "Touch me not, for I am not yet ascended to my Father." That is, his soul had not finished working out all the entangling interactions of the three gunas imprinted in his astral and causal bodies, so that he could leave their limitations in oneness with spirit. That accomplished, he would have the freedom and omnipotence of spirit to remain merged in the infinite consciousness, or to assume his immortalized familiar form, tangible to mortal senses, but unsubject to the incarnate circumscriptions. Until he was thus completely resurrected in spirit, he did not want any physical vibration with its material grossness to have contact with his manifested form that was highly spiritualized with astral life-tronic vibrations. Such was the superphysical nature of the body of Jesus that Mary did not at first even recognize the form as that of Jesus. So I thought one reason I thought this was interesting was that it's probably in all traditions, isn't it? We're not to touch a deceased body, and for some reason we're like, it feels like it would be taboo, even though you don't know the science of it. But there is a science to it. In Christ's case, it's obviously a very divine purpose. But for mere mortals such as us, the soul hasn't yet moved on fully. Usually, like within the first few hours or few days, it hasn't gone to the astral, so it's still around. So then we don't want to encourage it to stay near the body. But yeah, Mike.
I think one thing that was also a bit unique in the Christ case was that oftentimes you hear someone passes away, a saint passes away, and then he appears to his disciples. But here it was actually, he had to resurrect, like it had to happen in a material way. Like there was this rock in front of his tomb, and then the rock was removed, right? For people to believe it, I guess. He had to, because I guess it was a very material age, and that's why he actually had to take the same body back and revive it, right? I think that's different than in some other cases.
Didn't Guruji say that he recreated a physical form that looked and felt exactly like the original one? I'm sure he said that somewhere.
Of Jesus?
Yeah.
Didn't he appear to him twice? Once with blue eyes and once with brown eyes?
Yeah. No, I'm talking about the resurrection. His resurrection. That's
Oh.
in the Bible I was talking about. But I need to check my references before saying that. That's definitely true. Yeah, Erin, do you want to carry on?
Yeah. By the power of his Christ wisdom and sattvic karma accrued through his free will governed righteous actions on earth, Jesus burned out the last traces of karmic residue left by his flesh engendered fear of death when he said, "Father, if thou be willing, remove this cup from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but thine be done." And when on the cross he cried, my God, why hast thou forsaken me?" The delusion of his painful mortal death was so persuasive that for a moment Jesus lost touch with the reality that an omnipresent God, his own divine Father, could never forsake him. Delusion imposed metaphysical weaknesses, no matter how tenuous, have to be expunged before complete liberation in spirit is attained, even by such superlative incarnate souls as Jesus.
Amazing, isn't it? Even incarnation as Christ has to just work out those last little integers of karma. Yeah, Chris.
Yeah, I recall we talked about this with Sri Yukteswar in minute 63, where his body shuddered because of this reason, that there were still entanglements with the body and the soul. So it's a very powerful thing. Kind of gives me solace, to be quite honest. Like, it's kind of awe-inspiring and shocking because these people are so great. These souls are so great, and they come into this plane, and the delusion is still so strong that there is still something to work toward. And they're like the greatest role models of all time, really, aren't they? To share this information with us so that we can relate as well. Such a blessing. Mike, do you want to finish us off on this?
Yeah, and I want to make one more comment, because like I don't know how to say that, but oftentimes the kind of examples that you see in the Bible, they seem very like fitting for the time. And I think of all the avatars that we know, Christ is like in a very dark age, right? He's in a very low age. And then it's also, you see how his life goes, like he tries to spread the wisdom and they put him on the cross, right? So
Mm.
it is pretty dark age that he's in. And I think also we have to see all he does in this context, right? He needs to teach those people in that age, like pick them up from where they are, right? And I guess the methods would be different than today, is what I'm saying.
Mm.
We don't really have a good historic track record of treating saints and accelerated souls on earth, do we? Hopefully that gets better in time.
I think it will get better. I mean, Guruji, he went to Mahasamadhi in a posh hotel in downtown LA. It's already a step up.
Yeah.
Good
point.
All right, I'll continue reading. If a man is locked in a room, it requires the opening of just one lock to get him out. But if someone locks him in 3 rooms, one inside the other, it will require the unlatching of 3 locks to free him. At death, the soul withdraws its life and intelligence from the physical body, but still remains locked up within the astral and causal bodies.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that's in Discourse 75. For those who want to continue that lovely chapter, but obviously it's somewhat relevant to Guruji's parting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's an unfortunate truth that we have 2 more bodies to unlock.
Exactly right.
That's part of the journey that we all accepted.
Yeah.
Huh? So
I don't know if we
path.
accepted it, but we're in it.
I did often wonder about this. Is sort of little candles, fluttering in the wind. Did we it was consensual? We said, okay, let's go into this possibly infinite journey. I think that probably goes towards the unity. Like if you were to join, God in unity one time, then what is separate and what is not? So we're all part of the same. So it has to be ultimately.
Guruji talks about this in one of those 3 books, Man's Eternal Quest or Journey to Self-Realization. And that he's literally having a conversation with God. Like, why did you create this world, and all those like profound questions. And it's pretty special, that chapter. I'll see if I can find the reference to it.
So that really sums up this minute. We talked about it in good detail, from the scenes to what Masvidal was saying, to more detail about the incorruptibility that isn't necessarily in the minute, but yet super interesting topic. And yeah, we've taken some learnings from it. But Priyank, do you have anything you'd want to add?
Erin was complaining to me saying, "Oh, this is going to be a short episode because there's only Masvidal that says 3 lines," and I said, "No, believe me." We'll extract all sorts of topics from those 3 lines.
Yeah, I'm very impressed. I've definitely learned a lot as well. Because as I said, I'm very new to this path. So so many of these stories and stuff I hear are always the first time hearing it. So thank you guys.
Nice.
Thank you for coming on.
Thanks for coming on, Erin.
It's been a pleasure.
In closing, I'll leave you with a few words of Guruji's. And he said, "Whoever thinks me near, I will always be near. And only love can take my place." Jai Guru.
Jai Ma.